Okay, great. I think I'm gonna get started, and I know folks will be joining us as we get into the 7:30 hour or half hour here. But I'd love to welcome you all. Good evening. My name is Lauren Wolf. I am a clinical psychologist. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Hurdle, the first and leading culturally intentional mental health care company designed for people of color and other minority groups. Hurdle was founded in 2018 by tonight's author, Kevin Dedner, and grew out of Kevin's own life experiences that he shares through the essays in his incredible book, The Joy of the Disinherited, Essays on Trauma, Oppression, and Black Mental Health. On behalf of Hurdle, I'd like to welcome each of you and thank you for being here tonight. I was fortunate to read Kevin's book, and though, yes, I am an employee of Hurdle and I work with and for Kevin, that has nothing to do with what I'm about to say. I was literally blown away by every page in his book. In a country where mental health care is stigmatized and it's ill-designed, particularly for people of color, it is so powerful to have read about the origins of where and how Kevin's ideas were shaped, ideas that are just now beginning to transform our approach to mental health care and ensure that it's inclusive of everyone. The Joy of the Disinherited is a vulnerable offering to help people find an empowered path to healing. I believe it is the courage and the honesty that Kevin invites us to discover through his eyes that can open all of our eyes to the challenges and the horrific inequities impacting mental health in our country. That's why companies like Hurdle exist. Our mission is a natural extension of the book. We exist to ensure people can show up whole, operate with joy, and live with power. I honestly believe our entire country would benefit from reading Kevin's book from cover to cover. And I am so grateful to be here tonight with you to celebrate this important piece of literature. With that, I am very excited to introduce tonight's MC, Stefanie Bryant. You may know of Stefanie as an acclaimed, award-winning journalist who has worked in television news markets across the country. She brings her journalism background and media relations and communications experience to her work at MedStar Montgomery Medical Center and Olney, Maryland, as their senior marketing specialist. Her love of the broadcast industry and her strong belief that we all have a voice led her to found SB Media, where Stefanie helps people effectively tell their stories. What you may not know is that Stefanie was a news anchor in Kevin's hometown of Little Rock, Arkansas, and has long been someone that Kevin has respected so deeply for her work. Without giving too much away, we can all look forward to hearing the limited series podcast hosted by Stefanie that goes behind the scenes with Kevin about his book. I'll share more information on how you can listen to the podcast later tonight. But first, thank you again for attending, and Stefanie, all yours.
Good evening, and thanks so much for those kind words, Lauren. Welcome to what will be an awesome and insightful night. As she said, my name is Stefanie Bryant, and I am your host for this evening. And welcome to the virtual launch book party for The Joy of the Disinherited. It is a personal memoir told through essays written by Kevin, and in a very raw and truthful depiction, Kevin opens up about the death of his father and how that one incident had changed his life forever. And for Kevin, it ultimately meant addressing his father's death and his own mental health. And I hope you enjoyed, as Lauren said, you enjoyed reading it as much as she and I did. Tonight, we will hear from Kevin, who will read excerpts from the book. We'll hear from key players who played a vital role in the research, and a chance for you to ask any of your questions. So be sure and put your questions in the chat and comments. We can't wait to get to them. So stay tuned tonight to what will be a fun-filled night. Just as exciting as the words that are on the page is the book cover itself. And here to talk more about the cover is the artist Timoteo. But let me tell you a little bit about Timoteo Murphy. He was born in the US, raised in Japan. Timoteo Murphy is a multidisciplinary artist who immersed himself in the DC art scene upon his arrival over a decade ago. Today, he is a respected artist who is passionate about supporting women and youth in the arts. He is a self-taught artist whose work spans various mediums from postmodern expressionist painting to photography and large art installations connected to social justice issues and community building. Of Dominican and African-American descent, he is deeply inspired by his diverse cultural heritage and the role music can use to bridge cultures. Here to talk more about his inspiration for this cover, which is dynamic, is Timoteo. Good evening, Timoteo.
Good evening. Thanks for having me, y'all. Can everyone hear me? Nice. This book cover is, I appreciate having me a part of this project, Kevin. Kevin has purchased some art for me in the past, and then he reached out to me in regards to this book, and I'm really happy to be a part of it because this book has opened up a lot of conversations throughout my community as asking me, what am I doing now? And hey, I'm working on this book cover. And this book has went through many studies before we actually got to the one that you guys currently have as your background. And I'm really pleased to have it. A lot of these characters in this cover is Kevin's family, and as well as friends and family of mine. So, and everybody on this page, doesn't matter, nationality, people of everybody can relate to a lot of these things in regards to mental health. So the cover, the colors mean a lot. The paint is done by Bolivian dye. I get from Bolivia. The paint is regulated by the U.S. government. This paint is imported to me in Bible paper. This Bolivian dye is really beautiful. It's not the color that you see that once I add water to it, it turns a different color. The blue, I studied some colors. I studied a lot of the colors that's been put on this master paper. Master paper is archival. Everything on this master paper is archival. The images of strings, the chains, the strings represent the invisible barriers that we face day to day with life and different things. I was having a conversation, we just left dinner, and I had a conversation about, I hate to detour a little bit, but I had a conversation about the last time I had to deal with kind of like, mental health issues, like things that, Tim, you need to stay calm about it, or I'm like, no, I need to speak out. It's about ways to handle things. And those chains breaking is me handling myself, handling certain situations in life that is, how can I say this? The invisible chains invisible barriers that impede us in life. And that's what I want to create for this cover. I want people to see it and feel inspired. A lot of the colors are used off of that word joy. So I want people to grab that book and think of positivity and growth. And the flag, the racing flag, is like race or racing to whatever goal that we have for ourselves. Yeah, I think that, if anything else that I didn't touch, it's kind of hard to articulate a lot of this stuff because it's a lot on this front cover that, you got police on there, you have plants, you have family. But yeah, that's in a nutshell the Joy of the Disinherited's cover that I was glad to be commissioned for Kevin's cover.
Thanks so much, Timoteo, for those words and articulating so, I don't know, graphically about how you came across with some of the images and the choices that you used, especially explaining the chains and the strings. So thank you so much for doing that.
Welcome.
We now get to hear from the author himself, Kevin Dedner, who will grace us with an excerpt. And Kevin, I'm so interested to find out, which one did you choose? What excerpt are you going to share with us tonight?
Well, first of all, Stephanie, let me just thank you for moderating tonight. And I also want to thank my colleague, Lauren, and all of the members of the team at Hurdle who have been so supportive in the launch of the book, and even more for the work that they're doing every day to transform mental health care in America. And so I'm so proud of the team that I work with and so grateful for the sacrifices that they're making to move our company forward. I also just want to say that you all just heard from Timoteo, but there are a lot of people who've been involved in this work for the last year. I don't want to risk calling people by name, but you should know that there's somebody who is responsible for every detail. There are no typos in the book. All of the sentences make sense. So the interior of the book was laid out perfectly. So the book is available everywhere books are sold, and you should know that somebody played a role in making sure that every detail was done. And so I just want to thank the entire book team for their work. And before I read, I also just want to thank my family. My children are here, my mother and my brother, and I see Olivia is also here. And so I just want to publicly thank them for their support over the last year. I started journaling, really as a part of my own maintenance to my mental health. And then I realized that this was the path to write the book that I wanted to write. I've been wanting to write a book for about 5 or 6 years about Black men. And I recently said I needed to live a few more chapters and some more things need to happen in the world before I could write the book. And so the book looks completely different than what I thought it would look like. And for those of you who've not read it, let me just tease you a bit to say, although the book is a memoir and essays, each essay is meant to stand alone, but the essays are placed in order that weaves together a story of my life and a story of my mental health. And so tonight, I am going to first read from an essay entitled Sacrificial Love. And this is the very first essay in the book. I really love this essay, and so listen in. In Ella Mae's rewrite, Johnny was taken from us because God had grown envious of our love for him. Here is where I should tell you, it is not customary for families like mine, Black families of American South, to call their grandmother by her given name. Many of our grandmothers take on the title of Medea, but Ella Mae insisted we call her by her name. She has always been and will forever be Ella Mae to her grandbabies. She is endeared to us and we to her, which is why the morning of Johnny's funeral, Ella Mae invited all of her grandchildren into the front room of her home. Even back then, the wood floors of the house were paper thin and reflected light in places where footsteps and linseed oil had worn the panels smooth as marble. In the front room was one piece of furniture, a sectional sofa that Johnny bought for rare occasions when Ella Mae would invite folks over to sit. I arrived at home in Tucker dressed in my Sunday best on a Saturday, fidgety from everyone's stern bereavement. I took my seat on the couch and tugged at my starch-stiff collar as I traced the edges of those shiny spots on the floor with my polished shoes. Stillness is all but impossible for the living until our dead are laid to rest. Ella Mae's voice entered the room seconds before she appeared. She was dressed in black rayon with a wool pillbox that women of her generation wore at funerals, black mesh pulled over their eyes. By the time she stood before us, she was already mid-sentence. It was as if she'd been feeling each precious second since Johnny was pulled forever downstream with the urgent language of the Black matriarch, sacrifice. Surely there is no greater pain in a person must bear than to bury their own child. Ella Mae buried 3 of her 8 children, Johnny and 2 lost girls at birth. By the time she was 7 years old, she was an orphan. Later in life, she'd nursed her husband, George, through his dementia until she laid him to rest as well. That morning, she delivered the kind of inquiring soliloquy that only a grandmother who stared death more than once could give. Do you know what it feels like to be jealous? Yes. Do you know that God is a jealous God? Yes. That's right. In Deuteronomy 6:15, the Bible tells us, for the Lord your God in your midst is a jealous God. Lest of the Lord your God will be kindled against you, and he destroy you from off the face of the earth. It was an unusual passage to quote to grieving children, but we didn't flinch. We listened with rapt attention as Ella Mae explained that God had grown jealous of our love for Johnny, that our dependence on Johnny has subsequently diminished our faith in God's ability to provide and care for us. I'm going to skip and go down a bit. For Ella Mae, there was no age too young to learn the power of God. Here was a mother, come hell or high water, would ensure that her son's death was not in vain. There was no better place to teach the family's theology of love and life than on the banks of the bayou, baptisms, and in the hours before laying to rest our dead. These were the sites of divine sacrifice. We were children that day that Johnny drove his family to the river, but there, now seated before Ella Mae, we had previously become little adults, made vulnerable by tragedy. Ella Mae understood this distinction, even if our parents did not. We needed to learn sooner than later that desperation should one day draw us close to prayer. My family is not the only Black family that preaches of a jealous God and sacrificial love. Neither is sacrificial love unique to Black people. It is the love language of the disinherited. But rather than speak in generalities, I will speak only from my own story. That way, you can believe me when I say that sacrificial love is one of the purest forms of love that I both received and given. I felt this love from my mother on nights when she was not around to kiss Billy, Cynthia, and me goodnight because she was at school earning her degree in psychology. Her sacrificial love showed us that life would most certainly go on, even if her brother and our father's heartbeat didn't. I heard this love in Ella Mae's voice when she insisted that any death in our family, no matter how senseless it seemed, would always have a higher purpose than adorned tragedy. And for years, I gave this love back to the world. I lovingly placed my time, treasures, and talents on the altar of hope in exchange for a promise of a world where even against the background of Black anonymity, I might emerge luminous and particular. All it required was everything I had: my marriage, my joy, and my faith. Sacrificial love is an unallied love, complete and unreserved, yet it is born of a broken, inequitable world. Black Americans, like my family, have long leaned on this form of love out of necessity. We've sacrificed blood, sweat, tears, time, money, labor, peace of mind, and the clothes off our backs so that our loved ones and future generations might live a fuller life than we did. We do this believing that disinherited recipients of our sacrificial love will have a fighting chance in a world designed to keep them down. In this way, sacrificial love is a symptom of oppression, not a cure for it. I see this now. After teetering on the brink of dark depression for several years of my life, my well of dignity run dry. I began to perform a delicate surgery on my psyche. How are we doing, Stefanie? Should I read one more passage, or is that we're on time?
It's up to you. I thought that was beautiful. So if you have another,
I'll close out with one last piece. This section here, I'm going to sort of keep the, let's see here. This is really hard picking where to read from, you know. But I actually am going to read from Son of Little Rock. And I just realized today that today is my Uncle Glenn's birthday, who I write about in the book. And so I'm going to read a passage that mentions him. So let me just start there. I too resented the culture and the social pattern of Little Rock Southern norms. But after following in the footsteps of my father's resistance during my adolescence and narrowly avoiding the judicial system, I decided I would take up a different course of action. My mind turned to the forum where my elders worked as farmhands and maids. I thought about how my Uncle Glenn, my father's uncle, spoke of the Holy Spirit's divine love at Daddy's funeral. He spoke knowingly and believably, offering up a dignified eulogy filled with hope. I thought about how Uncle Glenn taught me how to use the weight of my body to throw hay. Neither he nor I are large men, but he taught me how to use what I have to move bales double my size: squat, push, press, pitch. I thought about his lessons on how to properly chop cotton, shuck the wild weeds that grow up around it, and take note of the good plant parts so that you not accidentally cut the cotton before the bolls bloom. I would return to the country after the shooting incident. The country was where I found refuge. It is where I weaved together my own expression of resistance. I started throwing myself into manual labor, working the land, spending more hours outside than in. I chopped cotton and laid pipes in the rice field. I was up at sunrise for coffee and a hearty breakfast with Uncle Glenn, and in the fields by 7 a.m. Uncle Glenn wasn't much of a lecturer, lest he was standing in the pulpit as a lay minister. He modeled his belief and values, but some of those mornings he would offer gentle lectures about hard work and achievement. It must have been the same lecture that his mother, my great-grandmother, had given him, my grandmother and their siblings. When I was indoors, it was with Ella Mae, in her home 2 doors down from Uncle Glenn. She fed me brown beans, and between work breaks, for treats, she'd make tea cakes. As I ate, she filled the silence with stories of her past to remind me that our family does not shake easily or quickly from this earth. One last passage, Stefanie, and I'm gonna stop. Mornings in the field were especially quiet. In that stillness, I began to appreciate the natural sounds and the visuals of my environment. A bird song, dews drop on the slender blades of grass and the soft balls of cotton. The way the colors on the horizon changed, the higher the sun grew in the sky. Cotton fields can be especially long, sometimes 2 to 3 miles long. In the thick of the summer, the cotton was as tall as I was. By the time I made it through half of the field chopping cotton, I was soaking wet. I found peace in those rows of cotton. Some days my cousin Glenn Jr. and Curtis Ray would join me. We'd make small talk and imagine what it would be like when we grew up. One thing we knew for sure, although we enjoyed being on the farm, we wanted a different life. How about that?
That was nice. I liked it. It really kind of shows, you growing up, and or you gave us a little hint to that, picking cotton and then sharing the sacrificial love. I thought that was beautiful. And someone also agreed. They said really heartfelt, Kevin. And I implore others to share their comments and their questions in the chat, because we'll answer those a bit later. We've heard from many of you so far on your thoughts about the book, and thank you so much for sharing. It means so much. Now we'll hear from some of the key players whose research helped inspire Kevin in his writing. We'll start with Dr. Norma Day Vines. Dr. Day Vines serves as an Associate Dean for Diversity and Faculty Development in the School of Education at Johns Hopkins University and maintains a faculty appointment as Professor of Counseling and Educational Studies. Prior to joining the faculty at Johns Hopkins, she tenured faculty positions at the College of William and Mary and Virginia Tech. Dr. Day Vines' research agenda examines the importance of multiculturalism as an indispensable tool in the delivery of culturally competent counseling and educational services for clients and students from marginalized groups. She has consulted with school districts across the country to address issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Her scholarship has appeared in leading counseling journals such as the Journal of Counseling and Development. She and she's also a part of Hurdle. Her work is at the core of Hurdle's culturally responsive approach. In 2013, she was recognized with an Exemplary Diversity Leadership Award by the Association of Multicultural Counseling and Development. In 2018, she received an Excellence in Teaching Award at Johns Hopkins. And in 2019, she was awarded a Presidential Citation from the American Counseling Association. And now I invite Dr. Norma Day Vines to share a couple of her thoughts on the book. Norma.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefanie, and thank you, Kevin, for writing such a brilliant book. I was just moved by your testimony. I felt that it was honest and searing, and I felt like you sort of really speak to the candor about the reality of Black life in America. In this book, I feel like we get to view your life and your struggles, the trauma that you encountered along your journey with the loss of your dad, but your valiant effort in achieving healing and redemption and wholeness through the power of a therapeutic counseling relationship, and also through the power of religion and spirituality. I think one of the things that struck me is that your story appears against the backdrop of what we talk about in terms of systemic racism. And if we define racism and discrimination as systems, as systemic ways in which one group is seen as superior and granted resources and another is withdrawn those resources, such as African Americans, and we look at how resources and opportunity structures and policies and practices are meted out, we see all of this in your book. We see how your family and community have been impacted by education policies such as busing and segregation, and also against the backdrop of the Little Rock Nine. We see the fight for civil rights. We see how transportation policies in your book displaced intact Black communities. We look at housing policy. I mean, you give us a clear picture of how many of these policies have impacted African Americans. We get to see issues around gentrification and lynching and toxic masculinity, and public health policies that provide very few supports for people, particularly for people with substance abuse disorders. I also felt like there was a lyrical quality to the story that you tell with your use of metaphor and the manner in which you communicate with the reader. And I felt like I could visualize everything you described in the book. A couple other things that sort of resonated with me in the book, I felt like the reader was able to see the power of community and how the community provides stability and nurturing. When you were, sort of flirting with life on the streets, we see how your uncle comes and just envelops you and provides a healthy alternative for you by reinforcing the value of nature and farming and self-regulation and discipline that allows you to sort of weigh options and strive for Black excellence. We see how your mother, who was a single parent, tried to create a life of normalcy for you and your siblings, so that you were able to move forward with dignity and strength. We see that how your father's story impacted you and your own experiences with racialized trauma. And I think your story teaches us that we can experience multiple traumas, but the weight of that experience, the cumulative weight of that experience, comes down on us sometimes in ways that immobilize us and make it difficult for us to function. And we witness your encounter with depression and anxiety in ways that could have destroyed you, but in ways you're able to emerge from. I think in the African American community, we think about the fact that we are strong, we have indomitable strength because, after all, we survived slavery, we survived Jim Crow, we survived the school to prison pipeline. I mean, we survived so many atrocities and traumas that sometimes we feel like we don't need counseling. And I think the beauty of your book is that you talk about how people are impacted when they ignore what's going on and how it affects both mental and physical health. I think another sort of thought that I had about the book is that your story defies stereotypes and focuses on strengths and resilience. So much of what we know about Black life and Black masculinity is negative and operates from a deficit perspective. But within Joy of the Disinherited, I think we are able to see a counter narrative that paints the Black experience in a very different light, which is very powerful. I think your book allows us to see how and why people can address their mental health needs, given all that we have endured. We see the power and healing of therapy, and we see that it is now more important than ever, as we've witnessed multiple pandemics, a health crisis, a financial crisis, a political crisis. To me, Joy of the Disinherited provides a roadmap, a compass, if you will, towards healing and wellness for us all. So thank you, Kevin. This was a remarkable book.
Beautifully said. And I like how you said that, Norma, how it brings about healing and wellness, because when we think about mental health, I mean, it's a stigma in so many communities, especially the Black community and other people of color. And so I think you accurately described it well, being, healing and wellness. With that, we will move to our next key contributor, who definitely his research has helped Kevin in his spiritual journey. And I'm talking about Pastor Max, as he's known. He is the senior pastor of East Friendship Baptist Church in DC. He is a disciple-making pastor whose passion is touching the heart of God and God's people. Prior to East Friendship, Pastor Max served as the assistant to the senior minister for men, children, and youth at the 6,000-member historic Metropolitan Baptist Church in DC, under the leadership of the senior minister and servant, Reverend Dr. H. Beecher Hicks Jr. Pastor Max has served 5 pastors in 32 years of ministry. He has been a consultant for many churches across denominational and ethnic lines. In October 1985, while stationed at Plattsburgh Air Force Base in New York, Pastor Max was called to the gospel ministry and appointed youth minister at the base chapel. He calls himself, he's a pastorpreneur, investing in people and developing entrepreneurs. He was CEO, president of 2 successful multi-state businesses and nonprofit ministries. He's been a consultant for many churches, as I said, and talks about evangelism, marriage, young adult, HIV/AIDS, and outreach ministries. Without further ado, here is Pastor Max. Good evening.
Thank you, Stephanie and Lauren, and of course, my beloved brother, Kevin. I am just so filled tonight. My joy is filled for this work of the Joy of the Disinherited that my brother had put out. I also want to thank Kevin's mother. We're so thankful for you for raising such a great son and his siblings and family and his children. I'm happy that as a pastor, a theologian myself, that Kevin encountered and rigorously used Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman's book, Jesus the Disinherited, not only as a reference, but an underpinning of the work of the Joy of the Disinherited. Howard Thurman is a mystic, theologian, pastor, educator, activist, influencer, really one of the greatest minds in American history. He not only influenced and had a great impact on the life of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but for most theologians and pastors and the members of the civil rights movement, you could not escape Howard Thurman's influence. Those in the Harlem Renaissance was deeply impacted by him. And so when you hear the work and the sound of the Joy of Disinherited, you're also hearing a lot of Howard Thurman's work. And so Kevin, throughout the book, takes us through a long history through systemic racism in the early South to police violence against Black men, what do you call like the Emmett Tills of today, Black men and women. We get a great snapshot of the hardened structures of injustice and the strange fruit that's still swinging from the trees of white denial. And so I'm so excited about how Kevin has placed the material in the book and its impact, not only on those who would read it, but I think it's going to have a great influence on mental health and drawing others to really seek therapy and mental health and to deal with the tragedies and the traumas that are continuous in our lives. The book also brings you into a Kevin and I relationship, from the first call on the phone to the first therapy session that I did with Kevin. Kevin didn't want to come see no pastor. I was probably the last person, or any pastor was the last person Kevin wanted to see, although we can hear the deep spiritual roots that Kevin has, and that his mother and family and church and all those in Little Rock, Arkansas, grounded in scripture, grounded in song, grounded in story, understanding the power of narrative. And so Kevin comes to me probably at the apex of depression. You know, his body language when he came in that day was guarded. But the Lord had given me a gift with African-American men in particular, and children and youth, to be able to hear a certain sound in their spirit. And what I was hearing was a mission. I didn't know what it was. I was hearing, the Lord prompted me to say certain specific things to Kevin. One of which is that, you know, he's in a dark cave and the dark canyons of depression, but that God was also in the darkness with him. Which is a critical notion, because everyone talk about light and dark when they talk about theology, good and evil, but God created darkness. He did some of his great work in the dark. All of you are in the incubators of darkness in your mother's womb, and how things grow in darkness. And so I wanted Kevin to know that God was with him in the darkness, and that God gave him a mission. And as he began to articulate how he went through different therapy sessions and got a little frustrated with not really be able to find a therapist who can understand his story, a cultural sensitive therapist. And so now he's in front of me. He's kind of stooping down in his seat, lowering his body, arms tight and everything. But I'm hearing a beautiful sound in the midst of his spirit. And then I asked him the question about, you know, what is your assignment in life? He began to tell me that going through depression has basically put a call on his life. And as he unpacked it, he was sharing that, you know, to bring therapy for Black men in particular. And I told him, I said, do you understand the spiritual warfare implications of the mission that you now have to bring deliverance to the Black men, to extend and give 10 years of extended life to Black men? I said, you cannot enter into that type of responsibility and mission and assignment without also having to deal with the warfare of our spiritual enemy. And I can see his eyes lighten up, and he sat up. He kind of looked me in the face and was like, wait a minute here, we may got something here. And so he really began to exchange with me, and his body language changed because he began to look at his assignment differently. And that's critical for anyone who's seeking their purpose in life. And Kevin talks about that in the book. He brings it out in clear how, you know, he has been trying to find his purpose. But I think right in that exchange that we had, his purpose was illuminated, and that it's costly. It's costly to bring liberation. It's what Howard Thurman talks about. It's costly to bring deliverance to people's minds, to free them, to bring healing to them, for them to recognize who they are. And so I told him that he's not only fighting his inner man, but he's also fighting a spiritual enemy who does not want Black men or women or those who have been marginalized, minimized, and devalued in systemic structures of America to be free. So I said, that's a huge assignment. But I knew Kevin was up for the job, because he has a twinkle in his eyes, even in his depression, that says there's a joy, an unspeakable joy that still resonates in his life in spite of. And so I'm so excited about this book and all that it brings to bear. My encounter with Kevin led to Kevin shifting his present business into my hands, Forward Solutions, and to allow him to focus on the mission. And that was my goal. I had not thought about going back into business at that time, but God in that moment was resonating, saying that I have a part of his liberation. Take what you know about government contract and entrepreneurship and free him. Because if you believe his mission is this important, you'll make a sacrifice too. And so I think the joy of the Disinherited is a sacrificial offering for the entire world. Black men, white men, Jew, Gentile, for each of us to be able to see ourselves in the story, but also that we all have to make a sacrifice to make a better America. And I'm so excited that Kevin would put pen to paper and push this book out and tell the story of his family, a story of a family that fought against serious racism in Little Rock, Arkansas, but the same racism that we find in the North and the South. The Klan changed its hood, they put on ties and suits and got torches and walking down the street today. And we're still faced with the same levels of racism today, but the trauma that is causing, no one was dealing with. We had a negative viewpoint of therapy and counseling. We have that even coming into church. Many people want to see the pastor, but they don't want to get counseling. And that negative view of pastoral care, counseling, and therapy, clinical therapy, this book is another hammer to break that shell and to help us to really experience healing that can happen when you start naming the demons you're fighting. When you can start naming things and giving them a name and call them out, as Kevin is doing throughout this book. It's a sense of empowerment. Then you'll be able to place your mind and bring your mind to a safe place in the internal self, without Howard Thurman talks about the inner self and how we can have to get to the deep places of our inner self to free it from a lot of the raging and hateful and venomous words that have been thrown at us and experiences and traumas and tragedies. And so, thank you, Kevin. I love you so much. I thank you for, daring to take this risk. And I know that it's going to impact not just us today, but for generations to come will read this book. And I'm so glad to be part of it.
Thanks so much, Pastor Max, for those riveting words. And I've been taking notes what everyone's been saying, and I liked what Pastor Max said, naming the demons and calling them out. I think that's one of the first steps to owning up to maybe what's going on with you mentally when you're dealing with depression. So thank you so much, Norma and Pastor Max, for sharing your kind words on the book and for helping Kevin in his journey in writing the book. The job of a beta reader is so paramount in the beginning stages when writing a book. They're able to look at the big picture, provide input and review as a casual reader, and provide feedback to the author. Well, for the joy of the Disinherited, beta readers, it was no different. Your constructive feedback and analysis was so graciously appreciated, and we wanted to take this time to say thank you. So we're coming to the end of our program. It's your chance to share your thoughts. Many of you have been sharing your comments in the chat area about just Timoteo's artwork, which was beautiful, really iconic. People have written. So if you have questions right now, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them right now. But before we do that, I wanted to let Kevin and Dantavious, who will also, Dantavious Hicks, he'll be answering some of the questions. He was a key researcher for the book. Dantavious Hicks is a licensed school-based clinical mental health counselor in Maryland. Before entering the counseling profession, Dantavious served as a middle school and adult education mathematics teacher in Hawaii. He also has experience coaching and training novice teachers through a culturally relevant anti-racist education framework. In the spring of last year, Dantavious earned the Johns Hopkins University School of Education's Student Excellence Award for his research, service, and scholarship. Thanks so much, Dantavious, for joining us. And we'll get into the questions. Let's see, what do we have here in questions? Here's a question that we have. The last 1.5 years have had a number of cataclysmic events that have birthed sort of a reckoning of change. The pandemic we know about, the murder of George Floyd, and the racial protests that emerged in the wake of George Floyd's death. Can you talk about the relevance of the joy of the disinherited in your current climate of change? And what changes or dialogue do you hope your book will spark? I know you talked a little bit about it, definitely in the teals of our time. So Kevin or Dantavious, Kevin, would you like to start?
Yeah, Stephanie, I'll start, but I also want to let people hear from Dantavious. And actually, I think the slide was a little misleading. It said he was a key researcher. No, he was the researcher in the book. And so I really want to give him credit because, when we did a competitive analysis, we looked at books that were being published, and there's not a book on the market like our book. Sort of the creative narrative and then the robust notes section really makes our book very, very different. And so, our aim is that even the book can be a teaching resource and help people understand what's happening clinically. But, to your point, and I do want Dantavious to build on my response to that, I think that that's also one of the reasons that there are many reasons I wrote the book, but I think that one of the things that I wanted to do is to help people understand the historic trauma, the vicarious trauma of seeing these events and how they are passed on. The stories are told in our families, behaviors are learned in our families that really construct how we interact with people. And what I hope to do in the book is to sort of put everybody on notice that all of us need to have, as Howard Thurman said, this deep internal reflection, that we examine our psyche to question how we've been taught to show up in society and like these things that are lingering. We're well aware of these events, but what is missing in the public conversation often is the impact that it has on our mental health. And I hope that the book will validate, that people really even suffer from watching things on the news, that there is such a thing as vicarious trauma.
Yeah, I just want to first, before we even address the response to the question, is just acknowledge the counselor in me is coming out, how vulnerable it is and admirable it is for Kevin to be vulnerable and be open about his experience, for people to learn from people to engage in some meaningful reflection on how they have experienced mental health concerns and how they have experienced beyond just mental health concerns, how they meaningfully reflect on how they engage with young Black men and Black boys. I think one of the things about the book that I was really struck by was that it's a developmental memoir, all the way from the critical point in Kevin's life. And what I really appreciate what you said, Kevin, was really thinking about how we as a society view mental health and what it means to be depressed and what depression looks like. And one of the things I really reflected on when I was invited to be a part of this project is, how do I invite readers to really think about the differences in how depression presents and the symptoms for young Black men, and what's different than what we see in our traditional symptoms of depression. Other thing too is Kevin made it very clear that he didn't want the book to be just for readers to engage in reflection, but also to be a point of reference for clinical work. And so I was very intentional about sources and references that I chose to really get readers to think about how there are experiences that have taken place in Kevin's life that have shaped how others view him and how others have responded to him in interpersonal relationships that he's had. So, and I say that to say, to go back to the question that was addressed, a wonderful question. When we think about the crisis and the global, the pandemics, a lot of people refer to as the triple pandemics that are taking place. We also have to be mindful of how people show and demonstrate that they are being impacted and affected. So as you read the book, each essay, he's very vulnerable and speaks from multiple perspectives about how he has been affected by what has taken place in his life.
All right, so well said. We are running out of time, but we do have a question from Christopher King, and he says, wonderful passage, Kevin. Tell us about how you feel having gotten through, the question went away. How you feel you've gotten this book out, and maybe tell us about what was meaningfully challenging for you in writing it, a particular passage. So I guess, was there a particular passage that was pretty challenging?
You know, I will tell you, I don't know that I would describe a passage in particular as difficult, but what I will tell you, the last thing that I penned was the preface of the book, and it was on Father's Day weekend, on a Father's Day camping trip I took with my son. And the first couple days that I read that out loud, every time I read it, I cried. And I don't know if it was because that was sort of the last piece. And maybe I'd been holding all of the emotion from all of the experiences, you know, building up to that. But I mean, it literally probably took me about 7 reads before I could get through that thing without literally stopping and crying. And so, you know, I think people will find that the book has a lot of emotion in it. And if you read the book and it doesn't bring you to tears or force you to sit it down yourself and reflect about your own life, that means I didn't accomplish my mission there.
Okay, and one last question. What is the main thing you hope readers take away from reading this book? And another one you can answer, will there be an audiobook?
Yeah, the book was first part of my continued healing. And I say this in the preface that I think for Black people in America, and even, you know, I'm going to use the term the disinherited, and I will extend that definition to brown people, to people from marginalized community, that our healing is continual. But, you know, I'm so grateful that I discovered the work of Howard Thurman. And I believe that deep internal inspection and reflection is a part of your healing. And when you do that, some of us have had experiences that are too heavy for us to manage on our own. And so the second part of the book is to demystify this process of counseling and the importance of counseling. So, you know, I see it as sort of 2 parts. Number one, it's an invitation to look internal, question how the world has told you should see yourself, question what the world has told you about how you fit into the world, and question all of the experiences, how you treat people, how people treated you. And when you do that, that work may become really heavy work. And that's the invitation for therapy. But yes, there will be an audio book. The mic is sitting up under my desk in a box. I've been procrastinating about pulling it out, but I hope to have the audio book out in time for the holiday season.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin. And with that, I'll turn things over back to Lauren.
Great, thanks, Stefanie. This has been a tremendous evening. Thank you so much to Stefanie, to Timoteo, Norma, Pastor Max, Dantavious, and especially to Kevin. Thank you all again on behalf of Hurdle. You can now pretty clearly understand how important it is that we're going to double down on the work we're doing at Hurdle, as Pastor Max says, to make America better by providing care delivered by providers who really understand, or that they're there to understand your story, and why we're working so hard to make our services more widely available, not just to reach consumers, but we're trying to partner with large organizations and large employers and health organizations to make our care accessible, to make it affordable. But more importantly, I'm sure you're all wondering, how do I get my hands on Kevin's book? If you didn't catch that at the beginning, the book is pretty much everywhere books are sold, which means you can find it on Amazon, Target, you can find it on my Kindle, a local bookstore, you name it. The podcast that Stefanie and Kevin have been working on, featuring key guests such as Dr. Dave Vines, who you heard tonight, is out now on all listening platforms. And Kevin also created this fabulous musical playlist specifically curated for his book. It's available in Apple Music and Spotify. And everyone who attended, you didn't need to write all that down, everyone who attended the event will be receiving an email tomorrow, so that will contain a link to the book, the podcast, the playlist. So this is all coming directly to you. The email is also going to include an image with a quote from the book that you can post. We obviously encourage you to post on social media and get the word out there. So from Hurdle, from myself, I want to thank you all, and especially Kevin, I want to thank you for this gift that you've given all of us. Really appreciate everything that was shared this evening. And I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, and I wish you all a very wonderful evening.